Right, I think I'll start now then. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar from iFol, in which we'll be discussing accounts payable fraud, and we'll be posing the question: is your technology good enough to keep the fraudsters out? Now, fraud hits every business hard. It's estimated that a typical organization can lose around 5% of its revenue every year to fraud. Now, accounts payable fraud can be committed by a combination of people, like internally by employees, externally by vendors. Two parties often work together, or increasingly by an outside party who might be looking to gain access to the company's accounts payable systems. So we do want to hear from you today on this, please. Please don't wait until the end of the webinar to send in questions. Please just add them to the chat as you go. We've got a panel of experts here to answer your questions on AP fraud. So have you been affected, whether directly, indirectly? We want to hear your experiences today. Among other things, we'll be talking about what forms AP fraud can take and, crucially, what you can do about it. My name is Jay Viderlingham, and as I said earlier on, we've been joined by a panel of experts. We're still waiting for one guest to join us, but we can start by speaking, well, does Deborah R. Richardson, a leading authority in how to avoid AP fraud, is there. Deborah, just introduce yourself briefly and explain a little bit about what it is you do.
Sure. Again, my name is Deborah R. Richardson, and you might have heard of me by my saying putting the AP in happy. I have a podcast of the same name, but I focus on accounts payable and really on the vendor setup and maintenance process, how to avoid fraud, how to avoid compliance fines, and just overall bad vendor data so that your AP process can run smoothly.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for that, Deborah. Patrick Wetzel's as well, an executive with over 23 years experience in the corporate finance sector as well, joined us. Patrick, do you want to say hello in a little line of introduction for yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Jay. So my name is Patrick Wetzels. I have over 23 years experience in finance across pretty much every area of finance. The most relevant for this webinar is I've got over 10 years experience in the shared services space, which is obviously very relevant for this session.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm also hoping to be joined by Shakira Putra from Beamworks by Quadient Accounts Payable Automation a little later on as well. When she joins us, we'll get her involved in the discussion. So let's start off then by defining the problem of AP fraud. It's a huge issue. So how and why does fraud occur? Deborah, let's kick off with you first. Why and how does fraud occur?
Well, I think the biggest reason that fraud occurs, particularly external fraud, is because it's really just so successful, right? Fraudsters are always evolving, they're getting bolder, and because they know that many accounts payable teams are still following manual processes, such as receiving invoices and vendor supporting documentation via risky email. They're just taking advantage of that and just jumping all over that opportunity to perpetrate fraud. And if you think about it, right, we know we've got our IT teams out there that are hardworking. They've got their firewalls, security protocols in place, but at best, they are stopping about 85% of fraudulent emails, which is high, but it still means that you have to have a way to deal with those 15% of fraudulent emails that actually do make it into your inbox. And that can be in the form of a fraudulent invoice with, fraudulent banking details, or it could be in the form of a request to change banking details, and not just banking, but also check remittance addresses as well, so they can whitewash those checks. So fraudsters are just still taking advantage of the fact that there are lots of manual processes in accounts payable, starting with risky email.
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. Anything to add on that? I mean, why do you think AP fraud happens and how?
Well, it always starts with a need. and that need is to generate money out of something that's not necessarily legal. And obviously there's a we've got a strong cost of living crisis. There's a lot going on why people and criminal organizations are switching to these tactics. And one of the reasons why it's happening is also the fact that companies are losing people. They're actually understaffed. So that means that the more understaffed they get, and especially, as Deborah just mentioned, if your processes are manual, then obviously the more people you lose, the more that these processes, which are already quite weak, will actually break down even further. So you've almost got a perfect storm. You got a rising need to generate money, and on the other hand, you have manual processes which are weak in nature anyway, which are starting to break down because people are leaving.
Yeah, that's really good points there. And Deborah, you in the past have spoken a bit about the origins in fraud triangle. Do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah, so the fraud triangle comes from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and they looked at three elements of internal fraudsters and why they perpetrate fraud. And so the first of the fraud triangle is opportunity. And so if you think about the activities for the last 3 years, right, from the pandemic when everyone just kind of abruptly, right, went home, and through today with the Great Resignation, and as Patrick talked about, right, still having issues getting completely staffed up, then that opportunity for internal fraud has increased, because now maybe you have some internal team members that have more access than they used to, because maybe they're covering for someone else. So that's one. The second piece is rationalization. And so rationalization means that maybe because they are covering for someone else, right, they think they deserve more. So maybe they didn't get the raise that they thought they should have gotten. And so they think they are owed money or owed something, and so they take that in the form of, or they use internal fraud, or become that internal fraudster, and take what they feel that they are owed. And then the last piece of it is pressure. And again, with the activities of the past 3 years up to now, you could have team members whose spouses or partners have been displaced, maybe don't have a position. And so now there's financial pressure. And so that financial pressure, again, can lead to fraud. So you combine opportunity to perpetrate fraud along with rationalization and that pressure. And that really supports the ACFE's, or Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, claim that at any time or every year, every company is susceptible to at least 5% of their net revenue to be taken via internal fraud by, your own internal team members. So that internal fraud has increased along with external fraud with the activities of the past 3 years.
Yeah, that's great. And now, Patrick, we're living in, in 2023. It's a highly technical age, the age of AI. Are there any new types of fraud that people should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially AI. That's really on the rise. And it's getting to the point that for instance, it's becoming more and more easy to it's more and more easy to actually have a voice impersonation, of a person. So you could actually have the AI sound like your director calling you to make a payment. That can also be a human voice. Obviously, the bigger the company, the more easy it becomes to impersonate someone, because if you're working for a company with thousands of people, do you really know how the director sounds like? But then, even as I said, AI is now actually creating the opportunity to actually impersonate someone that and make them sound like that person, use the same words that the person is using. So that's something that's really on the rise. And also outside of that, those technologies make it easier to hack systems, to really I would say think the unthinkable, and it's actually, the modern day tech actually makes it possible.
Yeah. Well, interesting times we're living in. Now, before we get any further into the discussion, we've got a bit of a poll for you out there. If you could just be prepared on your button and answer this question, please. And the question is, have you ever received a spoof or fraudulent invoice? Have you ever received a spoof or fraudulent invoice? So the options are yes, no, or unsure. You just choose one of those. One answer, please. Be really interesting to get the results of this to find out just how kind of widespread this is. But we'll have the results coming through now. Yes, so yes, 67%, no, 33%, and nobody was unsure. So it's looking like, just over 2/3 of people there have received a spoof or fraudulent invoice. I'll go to the panel. What's your reaction to that, Deborah? Does this surprise you?
Not at all. And and I'm wondering if those that recognize that they received a spoofed invoice is it because they have automation in place that was able to detect it, and those that said they did not receive a spoofed invoice, is that because they don't have a way to detect it, and maybe they have received one? That's the scary part, and that's why I think AP automation, particularly AI within AP automation, can help those that may not recognize, at least not yet, that they may have been the victim of a fraudulent invoice.
Yeah, sure. Patrick, your reaction to that poll, 67%.
It worries me because I imagine that percentage of yes to be higher, because I've worked for quite a range of companies, and there's not one that hasn't had that situation. And very similar to what Deborah just mentioned, it wasn't because of they weren't caught because of any kind of automation. It was purely human intervention. Someone just spotted it. And so that kind of worries me, because I think that percentage is higher. So that I would be, for those who have said no, I would definitely go back into your organization and do a thorough audit, because I have a feeling that there's something missing.
Yeah. So you're thinking maybe they just haven't spotted it yet.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, given the extent to which this problem can result in huge financial losses and can negatively affect a company's reputation, it's obvious that tackling this problem can seem quite daunting to lots of businesses out there. But stopping AP fraud before it starts is critical, and having systems in place that can ensure that it can identify and deter thieves and effectively react on behalf of your company, it's so important for your company. So let's take a little look at how technology can help here. So what's at the moment at the cutting edge of anti-fraud technology at the moment, and what can it do? And let's go to Patrick on this one first.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, there are some. There's a growing amount of tools to spot fraud. But obviously, the better answer is to prevent, and prevent starts with vendor creation. And what you see, what's a really strong trend at the moment is that you cut out the middle person. So basically, entry of information, of vendor information in the vendor setup process, it's either done by the vendor directly into your system. Obviously, there will need to be a that will have to be combined with a review action, but basically there's no person within your company who is going to take that information and enter it, and therefore cannot get into the situation where they put in their own bank detail, for instance. And what you see is also there's some very strong, or there's some strong upcoming tools which have a very strong AI component, which is that once the setup has been done, that it will actually spot anomalies. So those are two very strong trends that you see at the moment, and I have a feeling Deborah will probably have seen even more.
Yeah, I was going to say, Deborah, what's in your experience, what's at the cutting edge of technology at the moment in this industry?
Well, one of the, so I just attended an in-person conference a couple weeks back, and one thing I did learn about some AP automation features, right, that include AI that can detect, for example, when an email comes in with an invoice, right, that it can determine that it's coming in from a different email than the last invoice from that same vendor, right, where it can detect that it came in from a different email address, which is, right, a red flag. And so those types of things, along with the ability to include like validations within the AP automation, and that I like a lot. Because today, if you're doing that piece manually, one, you have to rely on the fact that your team members are actually going to do the validations, and two, it's not always something that leadership will spring separately for. And what I really mean by that is that bank account ownership validation, verifying that your the vendor's name equals the bank account holder's name, the tax ID that was used to, or unique tax registration number or registration number that was used to open up the bank account matches that unique registration number that the supplier or vendor gave you for vendor setup, right? That's not always something that's available, or that that's in the budget, but it's also it is something that may be included in an AP automation project that's implemented. And so I think the automated validation takes away the human error of maybe not doing it or not doing it correctly. And then I think it also gives the ability to even do that validation when on a manual basis, you just don't have the resources to do it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're hoping to be joined by Shakira Putra from Beamworks by Quadient. Is this a technology that you're familiar with, and can you give any examples of ever having used it or been aware of it?
So specifically with vendor self-registration portals, now let me just say they are all made differently. They all have different features and functions, and you need to do your due diligence to identify which one will work with your particular vendor mix, with your company, with your industry. But best-in-class vendor self-registration portals will allow the vendor to log in, and they'll have some security around that. Although we have seen isolated incidents where the fraudsters were able to get their login information, right, and log in for the vendor. But there should be some additional security protocols if that IP address is different, if some other factors are different. Again, vendor self-registration portals are not all made alike, and make sure your security team reviews it. But they should have protocol around the sign-in process. And then once they sign in, at every step of the pieces of data that they give you, you should be able to, or that portal should be able to validate that that information is valid. And not just because they might be you want to make sure they're not a fraudster, but you also want to make sure that, you know, if you send them something, they're going to get it, right? So you have to make sure that the address is standardized and validated. You want to make sure that the bank account information that they give you is valid, not just the bank account ownership, right, to make sure that it's not a fraudster, but also the routing number, right? Because routing numbers change all the time. Bank merge, banks merge, they also are acquired, banks fail, right? And so those routing numbers can change, and the vendors don't always tell you that, and they don't always pay attention, especially if their bank account number doesn't change. And so there needs to be validations at every step of the entry of their vendor data. And so there are vendor self-registration portals out there to do that. There are also portals out there that can verify that, you know, when they're uploading, for example, a copy of their W-9 or W-8, can make sure that, you know, they're not uploading a picture of the cat or their dog, right? So they have the ability to validate what's being uploaded. And then, as Patrick said, that keeps, right, that sensitive information out of a middle person, particularly the internal team member that may be collecting, that used to collect that information on behalf of the vendor to send it to the AP team. Now it's going through a portal. That portal is doing validations on that data before it gets into the ERP. It works very well, although supplier adoption can be an issue. Many of the portals out there have that AI and have those validations in place to make sure that by the time it gets into your ERP, that vendor is real, that information is not fraudulent.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Patrick, after the poll, you were sort of a bit surprised by the people that you felt that hadn't experienced fraud. Is it your opinion that ERP and AI still has some way to go when it comes to spotting these anomalies?
Well, yeah, I mean, the systems are always getting better, you know, but there will always be the human element, and so that's something like the end result is only the end result is only as good as the strength of your system combined with your processes. And processes, there's always a human element in there. So which is why there's an absolute need for to review your processes, to do audits, but also to have a situation where people can raise their concerns, you know. So it's often those companies that who do not have a strong process in place, who have very little automation, who do not audit, who do not have an environment where questions can be raised. That's where fraud is going to be probably it at least has a much higher probability of actually working.
Yeah. And can I also say too that, right, if we have access to AI to help us, right, detect fraud and do, you know, 100 other things, so do the fraudsters, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, and so gone are the days where you can, you know, spot a a fraudulent email just by looking at it, right? And take away the grammatical errors. Nowadays, if you see an obvious phishing email that has a lot of grammatical errors and context errors, that's absolutely on purpose. They're trying to weed out that first tier of recipients of that email or potential victims that's not going to fall for it. And then the ones that will fall for it, right, that respond to it, now they'll take them up to the second string or the second sequence in that email. And so they're using that AI to improve what they do. And that's the scary part, is while we can use and are using AI and other tools to help us detect fraud and help us to be more efficient, the fraudsters are using it to do the same thing.
Actually, on that, like, if you want to amuse yourself but also scare yourself, just go into YouTube and look for AP fraud or or look for invoice fraud or stuff like that, and you'll see how incredibly shrewd and clever a number of these fraudsters are. It's so easy. And so therefore, really, have very strong order process place, have very high levels of automation in your process, and but definitely do not miss out on the audit, and do not think that it won't happen to you, because it's so widely spread at the moment that it's just really just protect your company, protect yourself.
Yeah. Now we've touched on this a little bit before, but as you mentioned, lots of fraud is actually highlighted by internal anonymous whistleblowers. Those humans that kind of catch the ball as it falls through the net, if you like. How does new technology help these people within companies?
So I think it makes the internal fraud a little easier to detect, a little quicker to detect. But the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, or ACFE, they still point to the fact that internal whistleblowers, right, are the key in stopping that internal fraud. If they don't have internal whistleblowers or an effective way for them to anonymously report, they have shown that, or their studies have shown that the internal fraudsters take twice as much. And so what they recommend is that there be a way to anonymously report via phone, via email, and then also some type of a web form as well. But anytime you automate any of your internal processes, it makes it easier to, well, one, it makes it a little harder to perpetrate that fraud. But if it is perpetrated, it makes it easier to find it.
Sure. So I suppose best practice, if you like, is to protect themselves against AP fraud by staying vigilant, closely monitoring all their transactions and financial statements for any kind of inconsistencies. So how do you know that your anti-fraud technology is doing what it should? Deborah, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so I think you want to make sure that it's doing its job, in that you are using it. And what I really mean by that is you need to make sure that what you put into place allows you to take that vendor supporting documentation, that invoice, out of that risky email and utilize, right, that AP automation tool that you just put in place, not only for collecting information, but also for inquiries too, because fraudsters will pretext, right, to try to get information, to send future fraudulent requests. But once you do that piece, I think benchmarking to make sure that, and tracking either with key performance indicators, KPIs, or with regular metrics to make sure that you are tracking the volumes of your productivity, and then also you are monitoring any suspected fraud based on that automation tool, because they all have some type of measurement tools that you can review. And so someone needs to be looking at that on a daily basis, and not the way they look at expense reports. They actually do need to look at that information.
Sure. Now, obviously, it's important. We're talking about new technology, and can your technology protect against future fraud? But Patrick, I want to ask you, how important is it for firms to review previous frauds and explore what went wrong and what happened in the past, and what lessons can be learned from that?
Oh, that's really critical. You need to learn. I mean, this is going to be very obvious, but you need to learn from your mistakes but also, and I think this is where it's really important to have that environment where questions can be asked, because also there will also be there will be an element of shame in there as well, that if something like this happens, someone spots it and think like, oh, something went wrong here, they might not want to raise it. So therefore, having that real open environment where these cases can be raised is incredibly important, so that you can learn from them. And again, this also comes back to the point of when you're going to audit your processes, when you're going to audit these situations, you're always going to look backwards, but always with the intention to learn from it. So yeah, that is hugely critical. You cannot improve your future process if you don't understand what went wrong in the past.
Sure, that's
and
great.
Can I just say too, I like Patrick, I like that you talked about audit your processes a lot, because I am a big proponent of auditing at the vendor process level, right? So we're all used to that AP audit, but I think especially now in this age of increased fraud, and we're putting additional steps in place, we're putting in additional internal controls and best practices in place. The way that you make sure that your team is really always following that is to make sure you have that audit in place. When I was a practitioner, we audited vendor requests that were done on a monthly basis, and we held our team members to a certain percentage. So it was at a team member level, and if they went lower than that percentage, there was additional training. And then we also did it at the team level, right? Everyone's percentage rolled up, and if at the team level it went below a certain percentage, we did additional training with that as well. And you can put that in place whether you are still manual or whether you have some automation in place, because there's still some processes that need to be done if you automate, especially on the vendor process or vendor onboarding or setup and maintenance process. So auditing is key.
Yeah, and also what's also kind of, and that's that is also very much linked to it, is that I've been in so many companies where the level of purchase orders is low, and that's almost like a recipe for disaster, because if you don't use a purchase order, then the very first time you're going to see the invoice, the expense that's actually associated with it is actually at the point of AP entry, and therefore your last step towards payment. If you have a strong purchase order process, that will already put you in a position, and it's tedious and people don't like it, but it's a really good extra layer of security, because because at the point of purchase order, that's already going to raise questions. If you don't have a purchase order it will all fall to the last hurdle, which obviously means only one thing has to go wrong for that payment to go out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Right. Well, let's talk a bit about cultural change within organizations. How can AP teams incorporate an anti-fraud culture and make it everyone's responsibility to be vigilant?
So I'll start with that one. I think it really needs to start at the top. I will tell you that I have talked to accounts payable teams where fraud has occurred, and you will. I can't believe that, but it happened. Their board member or their leadership will say, well, that should have been common sense. Well, it's not, because these fraud requests they appear legitimate. And so I think it really needs to start at the top. And it also means that we can't let, as has happened in the past with accounts payable, internal team members or even sometimes the vendors dictate, how long it takes to validate, right, that information, how long it takes to onboard a vendor, how long it takes to change that banking information. Because if you think about it, right, we are saving the company from a potential fraud attack, which could be, in the thousands, it could be in the millions. And that mindset of just let's hurry up and get it done, that needs to be changed. But it does need to start from the top, because it just won't happen if you've got leadership that thinks that it should be common sense. It's not fair to those folks that are in the trenches that, they're just, one didn't see that extra letter, or it appeared legitimate away from, right, being a potential victim.
Yeah, sure. I've just got an eye on the time, so I want to, before we finish, just like the panel here, to give everyone one key piece of advice for AP leaders on tackling AP fraud. Very briefly, Patrick, what would your one key piece of advice be for people?
Respect the process, build a robust process, and make sure that you add automation to your process.
Yep. Deborah, very briefly from you, one key piece of advice.
Yes, I would say get your AP invoices and your vendor setup supporting documentation out of unsecured email.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for your time today. That's Deborah R. Richardson, a leading authority in how to avoid AP fraud. Patrick Wetzel's there, corporate finance executive with more than 23 years of experience. Thank you both very much for joining us. And you can find more information about what we've discussed today on the IFOL website, along with information on IFOL membership. This webinar will also be available on the website too from tomorrow, hopefully. So do please share it. I'm Jay Vidalingham. Thanks again very much for your time and for your insights today. I hope you found it informative as I have. Thank you again, and goodbye.
Thanks for having me.